Daisy and Raymond have been married for several years. Most people assumed they were just an ordinary couple who went to work, came home, ate dinner together, and went about their daily lives. If you asked their friends or neighbors, they would say they were doing well. But nobody saw what transpired behind closed doors, the tiny things that gradually eroded their connection. Their marriage wasn't terrible, but it wasn't fantastic either. It was full of little conflicts, nothing major, but just enough to leave a nasty taste in their mouths. Disagreements that were not resolved were simply pushed aside with sarcastic jabs that appeared to be jokes on the surface, but conveyed a deeper meaning behind. These moments accumulated over time, resulting in unacknowledged resentments. The warmth between them had vanished, leaving a quiet anxiety that trailed them through the home like a shadow. Raymond had always been the confident one, the type of man who seemed unconcerned about anything. He spoke confidently, walked with his head held high, and never let anyone see, when anything reached him. Daisy felt this to be the case. She'd never thought of him as insecure, never believed there was something hidden beneath that tough facade. But Raymond harbored a secret, a profound psychological insecurity that had plagued him since he was a teenager. Something had been whispered behind his back, something he attempted but couldn't forget. It was not something he discussed, even with Daisy, and in all their years of marriage, she had never known how much it meant. That was until one night, in the midst of another disagreement. She let her frustration get the better of her. She did not ponder before speaking. She didn't think twice before throwing the words at him, and once they were out, she couldn't take them back. She had no idea that a thoughtless comment may change everything. It had been one of those stressful, tiresome evenings, packed with the silent irritation that had become a regular part of their marriage. Raymond felt frustrated. Daisy was tired. The dispute immediately developed into another shouting war in which none of them listened to the other. It was one of those conflicts when both parties felt cornered, and the goal was to win rather than solve the problem. Daisy wanted to win right then. She wanted to have the last word. She wanted him to know how fed up she was. So she uttered it without thinking, without recognizing the consequences. You dispute a lot about being a man. No wonder you're so small down there. The moment those words left her lips, the entire room altered. The fury subsided, but not in the way she expected. Raymond did not yell. He didn't argue back. He did not insult her as he typically would. He simply stopped. His countenance remained frozen in place. His jaw stiffened. His hands clenched slightly at the sides. Daisy, for the first time in their marriage, noticed something in his eyes that made her stomach plummet. It wasn't all anger. It was more than simply annoyance. It was something far worse. Pain, betrayal, humiliation, the kind of expression that told her she had just touched a part of him that she wasn't supposed to. A spot so well hidden that even his wife had never seen it before. Raymond turned and went away without saying anything. Daisy remained there expecting for him to return, for him to yell, quarrel, and fight back in the same manner he had always done. Yet he never did, and the quiet was far worse than anything he could have uttered. If you've ever been in a relationship, you know how conflicts typically go. There is fury, shouting, and sometimes someone storms out. But after a while, whether in minutes or hours, you get back together, communicate, or at least acknowledge each other. However, this time was different. That night, Raymond never returned to their bedroom. Daisy was initially unimpressed. She assumed he just needed some time to calm down, was angry, and wanted to be alone for the night. Perhaps he would return in the middle of the night while she was asleep. Or perhaps he simply needed a few hours to clear his mind. In any case, she didn't seem concerned. However, when she awoke the next morning and reached for him, the other side of the bed remained vacant. An unpleasant, unknown feeling settled over her. Raymond had never tried this before. He'd never just left. Even after their biggest fights, he would sleep in their bed, maybe with his back turned and a wall of tension between them. But he was always present. She got up and explored the house, expecting to find him in the kitchen or on the couch. However, when she found him in the guest room, sitting on the side of the bed, something had fallen off. He was not packed. He wasn't pacing aggressively or visibly upset. He just sat there unmoving and disconnected, as if something inside him had shut down entirely. Daisy paused at the doorway, waiting for him to speak. He didn't, so she went first. Raymond? Nothing. Why are you sleeping here? Still nothing. She tried again, pressing for an answer, asking whether he was still upset and if he was going to return to bed. But he scarcely glanced at her. And when he did speak, it wasn't to argue. It was not to express how much she had hurt him. It was only stillness. His agony was audible enough. Days passed, but nothing changed. Daisy initially convinced herself that it was only a phase and that he would soon recover. She went about her day as normally as she could. She convinced herself that he'd get over it, but he did not. Raymond avoided her at every opportunity. If she entered a room, he would leave. If she attempted to strike up a discussion, he ignored her. If she reached out to touch him, he backed away. It wasn't all anger. It was something deeper. It was as if he had removed her from his life without saying a word. Daisy attempted to mend it as best she could. She prepared his favorite foods. I hoped the smell of home-cooked food would soften him. He scarcely touched the plate. She attempted joking to lighten the mood, but he didn't laugh. She even tried to show affection, reaching for his hand or brushing up against him as they passed one another. However, he stiffened at her touch. Nothing worked. And then she realized something awful. For years, she believed that battling meant there was still something worth fighting for, that as long as they were bickering, they were concerned enough to be upset. But now there was nothing, and the hush. It was worse than any screaming match they had ever had, since it felt as if something between them had died. Daisy didn't know that her remarks did more than just harm him in the moment. They didn't only embarrass him or hurt his pride. What she said broke open a wound that existed long before she met him. He'd spent years trying to forget about the wound. Raymond has always felt self-conscious about his size. It was not something he discussed, even with his closest friends. Growing up, he had always felt inadequate. He recalls the jokes and the whispering behind his back. In high school, a rumor spread about him, sparked by a locker room conversation, and was not even real. But it didn't matter. It went to the incorrect person, the girl he had a crush on. He still remembered how she looked at him afterward. Not when you're angry, not even with sympathy, just indifferent. It was as if she no longer saw him. That moment stayed with him even as he became older. Those insecurities did not simply fade away. He brought them into his partnerships. He initially dismissed them as insignificant. Until one day they did. His last significant girlfriend cheated on him. He had witnessed the betrayal, and when he asked why she had not cried, she did not plead. She did not even attempt to fib. She simply shrugged and told him the facts in the cruelest way possible. "You cannot please me." That was the moment that crushed him. That was when he learned to bury his insecurities so deeply that no one would ever notice them again. He never spoke about it, never allowed someone to come too near to that part of him. He puffed himself up, conducted himself confidently, and convinced himself that he was stronger than ever before. Then he met Daisy. She was different. She did not make him feel smaller, didn't make him feel like he needed to prove anything to her. He felt protected and loved for the first time. He no longer had to be concerned about the things that had before haunted him. He assured himself that she saw him for who he was, that anything he had gone through did not matter till that night, until she threw those words in his face. "You dispute a lot about being a man. No wonder you're so small down there." That single sentence pulled him back. Return to the hilarity of high school. Return to the treachery in his previous relationship. Back to every hour he spent attempting to persuade himself that he was more than what others said about him. And the worst part? It wasn't from a stranger this time. It wasn't from a girl in high school or a cheating ex. Daisy was the one saying it. The one person he assumed would never say something like that. And now, for the first time in their marriage, he questioned whether he could ever look at her the same way again. He wonders if she has already cheated. Daisy reached a breaking point one evening. She discovered that while she was waiting for things to return to normal, they seemed to get worse. That night, she went into the guest room to speak with him and apologize. I expected to see him sitting on the bed going through his phone as he had for weeks. However, the room was vacant. The shower was running in the bathroom, and his phone lay on the bed with the screen still lit. Daisy had never been the sort to look through his phone. Even now, she paused. But she assured herself she'd only take a quick peek. She hadn't done much before she received an email notification from the notification bar subject about divorce proceedings. Her heart has stopped. She stared at the screen. Her breath was shallow. Her mind raced. Divorce. Divorce. No. It had to be a mistake. A misunderstanding. She wanted to believe it, but she knew better. It wasn't just a quarrel. This wasn't only about what she said that night. Raymond wasn't simply angry. He wasn't simply punishing her with silence. He was about to abandon her. A sense of panic washed over her. Her hands trembled as she placed the phone back down. She backed away from the bed, her body tight with emotions she couldn't express that night. She could not keep quiet any longer. She needed to know when he came out of the bathroom. She was already waiting. Her heart raced as she asked, "Are you actually considering divorcing me? Over one argument, for the first time in several weeks." He gazed at her, but not in anger. It was not even with sadness. It had nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was unusually calm. "Do you suppose this is only about that night?" Daisy's realization came at that moment. This was more than just an insult. It wasn't simply the remarks she had directed at him. It was about everything. Unresolved fights, emotional distance, and long-ignored wounds. Her words that night, they were not the reason he left. They were simply the final straw. Daisy made a mistake. She knew she had hurt him in ways she never imagined possible. And now she was desperate to repair what she had broken. Daisy faced a terrifying question for the first time. What if she'd already lost him? She tried everything. She apologized repeatedly, not just with words but with actions. She tried to contact him to remind him of the life they had created together. She prepared his favorite meals, left notes for him, and even tried to get him to discuss anything work-related, the weather, or something light. Regardless of what she did, he remained distant. He would respond to her questions with short, empty responses, a nod, a shrug, and silence. I'm not sure, but that was the thing. She had a feeling he knew. He knew whether or not he still wanted to be here, and she was afraid that his silence was his response. Daisy had always believed that regret was something you could overcome, that if you were willing to make things right, you could reverse the damage. But this was different. This was the type of regret that no amount of effort could remove. And Raymond. He had already started to pull away. Daisy could only watch as he drifted further away, wondering if he still had anything to hold on to. And then, one evening, she walked past the guest room, barely paying attention until something prompted her to stop. Raymond was standing next to the bed with an open suitcase in front of him. His clothing was neatly folded inside. He was packing. Her breath caught in her throat. This was it. He was indeed leaving. Her body moved before her brain could keep up. She entered the room, scarcely able to find her words. When she spoke, it was just above a whisper. "Are you actually leaving?" Raymond sighed, his shoulders rising and falling with the weight of more than simply tiredness. He did not glance at her right away. He only stood there for a moment. He gripped the edge of the suitcase as if to ground himself. Eventually, he turned to face her. I'm not sure if I can go over this. The words hit her like a punch in the chest. She had braced herself for rage, a fight, and him finally letting out everything he had been keeping back. But there's this peaceful, quiet uncertainty. It was so much worse because he wasn't attempting to harm her. He was telling the truth. Tears welled up in her eyes and streamed down her face before she could stop them. She didn't care. She wasn't concerned about pride, decency, or anything else. She simply knew she wasn't ready to let him go. I love you. Her voice crackled. I botched up. I'd return it if I could, but I can't. Please advise me what to do. For the first time in weeks, she noticed something change in his demeanor. For a long time. He said nothing. He just stood there staring at her, as if trying to decide whether there was still something between them. He eventually spoke. You cannot take back what you have said. His voice was low yet forceful, and I can't stop hearing it. But perhaps I do not want to walk away. Not yet. It was not forgiveness. It was not a promise. But there was something. Daisy had nothing else to hang on to at the moment. Raymond did not depart that night, but the damage lingered. Daisy understood that some scars could not be healed overnight. Here's the next story. I was thinking about having my mail and newspaper delivered to room 435 at St. Patrick's Hospital in Fort Wayne. After all, that has been my home for the past 8 months, and there is no hope in sight. And if someone wants to smuggle in a Big Mac or anything like actual food, I can make it worthwhile. Well, I know you didn't come here to hear me gripe, so let's go back in time and see how this clustered duck got started. Last Saturday, Uncle John came over to chat to my dad. When I entered the basement, they were sipping beers at the kitchen table. After spending time next door with Mrs. Jacobs until her husband arrived home, I heard the statement that would change my life. I was standing under the vent on the same ductwork as the kitchen above, when our operative disposes of the remaining 2. But will you keep the child here with everything else going on? Fortunately, Tommy Jr. struck him hard enough to induce amnesia, but that is a fickle thing at best. My mind went into what I call hyperdrive, and the only thing that stopped the severe migraine that ensued was the marijuana. So I went back outside the basement door. Then Monday arrived, and, as you know, everyone despises Monday. When I was younger, I struggled in school. I discovered that my memory could only recollect what I had heard or seen. So when the teacher had to pause and go over things with the other kids, I was bored and stared out the window. The more frustrated the teacher became, Pi** stated that I appeared to be ignoring her class. The more times I was sent to the office. Then, my school introduced a class that kept up with the times, computer class. I chatted to the people who were installing the wires and kept asking why this or that manner. He instructed me to get lost so he could do his job, but the guy in charge of getting everything done approached me on the final day they were there and offered me a lengthy list of books to look into, as well as locations and people in town who would be pleased to talk shop. At the bottom was his name and phone number, indicating that I could call him with any queries. Just then, my mind flew into overdrive. I was unaware of my surroundings and my ears had ceased working. Then it was like a balloon popping, and everything was back to normal, with Mr. Zimmer gently shaking my right shoulder and a concerned expression on his face. "Are you all right, kid?" he inquired with a peculiar expression in his eyes. My thoughts revealed me a new way to take, and I puzzled why I hadn't noticed it previously. "My name is Michael, Mr. Zimmer, and I am not fine. I am better." He drew me aside, and we had an odd but thrilling talk that led to me standing at the front desk of the office, tapping that awful bell, waiting for the secretary to emerge when she did. Mr. Zimmer was behind me, waiting for some documentation from the school to complete the installation. I stated what I needed, and she claimed she didn't catch everything, but she needed to contact the principal, and she slowly walked away. It took 13 minutes for him to arrive. I explained everything again. He asked me if my parents were aware of this. Mr. Zimmer's phone rang, and he stepped aside to answer it. The principal began talking down to me, telling me that I didn't have the right to ask, and that he would need parental permission before doing anything, with a slight smirk on his face. Just then, an arm stretched around my left side, startled me, and set his phone down on the countertop. My head turned to see a grin on his face, and then I felt a hand rest on my shoulder. "Hey, how are my dearest cousins doing this wonderful afternoon?" My mouth dropped to the floor when I heard my mother's voice come through the speaker. "So what's taking so long? You are an hour behind." When I heard the rest of the talk, my eyes nearly popped out. I wanted to start things differently, but the office required parental clearance, so I had no choice. It was Will's response, and I couldn't risk Robert responding. As you know, the voice that blasted from the phone caused me to take a half step back and duck. Use the boil on humanity as an asterisk to freaking get it done. Is this obvious enough now, Mr. Barker? "Yes, Mrs. Walters, this is extremely apparent," squeaked the small red-faced man across the counter from me. I grew to like my new relative, especially after he placed both elbows on the counter and urged the principal forward with a curled finger. "Anyway, we're going out to lunch, and he led me out of the office. We're finally on the way and have concluded the call. We'll fetch everything you need out of your locker, and then—" He noticed 3 men cross the hallway corner and begin walking towards us, then quickly turned me around and returned to the office. He walked me in, hand on my forearm around the counter, and opened the principal's door. I walked across the workplace through the first-floor windows. He opened the door and stuffed me out as he passed through. I stood up and heard someone yell, "At the very least, make sure the door is locked." "Now hold on," I began to speak as I stood up. "Not quite yet, cousin." Well finished as a car, a full-size van pulled up and over his shoulder, and I got into the truck. I felt its speed, and after a brief trip I was assisted into one of the 4 padded chairs available, with Cousin Will asking if I needed anything from the small refrigerator. I declined, so it's either now or out the door. The next time we stop, I glared at Cousin. Now he knew I wasn't lying. "Your name is not Walters, it's Coleman, and your first name is Michael." My now questionably called cousin began. "Your real mother and father were killed in a staged car accident, and at the time, all records indicated that you had died as well. Then your grandfather received a child's medallion with a note to collect fingerprints. Your grandfather was fed up with false trails that led nowhere and threw them away. Even so, his aide refused to let it go. So she retrieved everything and ran all of the regular tests on it. And not only did the fingerprints match, but you must have sweated a lot as a child because I was told it had a lot on it. They were able to match DNA, and your grandfather dispatched me to retrieve you." He then reached into the small refrigerator and grabbed a drink. I waved my hands around and asked, "So all of this belongs to my wealthy future grandfather, and I'm the wayward son returning home." He shrugged his shoulders slightly, and my head began to ache as my mind became hyperactive, seeking to grasp all of the possibilities when I thought, "Duck, this asterisk T." And I took out my pot and some papers. Still, when I looked up, Will handed me a metal cigarette case. My eyes met his with an inquiry. "Your grandfather had a hunch. He claimed that it was the only thing that could keep him on track when his mind refused to cooperate. I took one and lighted it before passing it back. He waved his hand, saying, 'Keep it.' Just as I was finished, I noticed 2 things fairly immediately. Point 1, Gramps has some fantastic stockpile. And 2, the van came to a halt, and the side doors were opened by some folks who could be rather unpleasant if provoked, as they certainly weren't a welcoming party. Behind them stood a helicopter, ready to take off. As I stepped outside, I felt a hand on each shoulder and heard a low voice say, "Hang on." Suddenly, a section of the pad dropped beneath our feet, revealing a boat below. I rolled down and got up on my feet. Do not ask me how the grin on my face appeared. I thought I was all that, and a bag of chips, until I swung around to find something directly behind me. I put my hands up to balance myself and saw the most beautiful green eyes staring back at me, framed by an angel's face with a halo of wavy, fiery red hair down to her shoulders. Furthermore, her smile hinted at a little playfulness, and her voice was a loving passion to my ears as I heard my angel speak. Can I get them back now? Personally, I like them. She was around my height and possibly a little older, but I had no idea what she was talking about until I looked down and realized my hands had come to stabilize myself by gripping both of hers. Her gorgeous smile never wavered as I was led to my cabin. I was looking for information on the captain. I discovered out she was 21 and had spent her entire life at sea. She told him that it was conceived and received on the water after being designed and delivered. Still, no one could equal her grace, as she seemed to become one with the sea. As a result, she consistently leaves the rest in her wake. A massive explosion occurred off the port side shortly after he mentioned this. I looked up to see the ruins of a chopper falling into the ocean. Then I observed 3 cigarette boats approaching quickly and over the intercom. I heard the winning number is 13,152. Now pull those stupid nuts off my girl so we can have some fun. Finally! Soon later, the cargo netting that were concealing the Abbey were cut and thrown overboard. The Abbey transformed into a different vessel, sleek and smooth by design. For wind resistance, keep it low to the waterline. I checked to see if I could catch another glimpse of Captain Hannah, and I did, just as she took the wheel with the expression of a woman finally in her environment. The fire in her eyes mirrored the color of her hair. Come on, boys. Wake the old lady up so she can get her sea legs. I almost heard a purring come up through the deck, and my guard suggested I forget about the cushions and sit on the deck. Then he pulled me into the cabin to return the gunfire from the other boats. After 2 muted explosions behind them, Michael felt the deck rise beneath his feet, followed by a force shoving him firmly towards the back of the boat. A hydrofoil sits on the cabin floor. I had time to reflect about my recent history. I'm about 20 years old, 5 feet 9 inches tall, and weigh about 160 pounds with very little fat because my mind keeps my body in motion. I have dark gray eyes and black hair that sometimes seems blue. I was constantly clothed in hand-me-downs since the family didn't want to spend money dressing up the mentally challenged child. The issue was that I was thinking too quickly rather than too slowly. And I was bored. Okay, those were the positive aspects of my life. The disadvantages were all of the subsequent ducking that occurred. Wow, how did I become so lucky? The only thing I could take away from all of this was that many people mistook me for this other guy and kidnapped me so I could meet this godfather-grandfather person. And one of them had a cute set of T asterisks. I took out the case Will had given me and led another one, because all I could do was enjoy the ride. I was laying back on the cushions, Gorgie Park by the Scorpions playing in my head as I dreamed of hands being run all over my body, when the fresh scent of the sea reached my nose, and my eyes focused on my fiery-haired angel who stared into my eyes and said, "You didn't tell him that one lasts for 5 hours. You're telling the boss man why his adorable grandson is walking on sunshine, not me." Hannah gave me some leeway. I was meant to hand him over to you, and you'd tell him not to come with me. Hannah kissed my cheek and commented, "You're a little heartbreaker, aren't you?" and gave me a brief kiss, and then I was flying. Actually, they lowered a sling used to load supplies onto ships, and 5 of us rode up in that direction. However, I usually leave out that section. I tell it. I should tell you that grandfather lives on a gigantic ship at sea. I think he prefers his privacy. So far, things seem to be going well. Just go with the flow for now. I was introduced to the personnel in a unique way before anything else was said. A gay male who was having fun with it approached me. He glanced at me and said, "I got you first, handsome. So come on, walk this way," and executed a flawless Freddie Mercury strut going to a hatchway. "When I'm done with you, you'll be a different man, both inside and out." The first thing that came to mind was that this should end happily. So, after 3 hatchways and 2 ladders, we arrived at a set of double doors which he leaned against, ran his eyes up and down me, pursed his lips, and murmured, "Welcome to Fantasy Island, darling." He threw the doors wide, revealing a spacious space that had been converted into a garment factory. There were finished clothing in one location, rolls upon rolls of fabric. Then, before I knew it, he gave me a sideways embrace and chuckled at the expression on my face. Michael, the staff member, constantly enjoys pulling the new meats chain. So, just relax and don't take offense when I urge you to pull those disgusting rags off your body, go through the door, shower, and clean up, then put on the robe to return to the outside world. Because, honey, I am burning those clothing. After a few hours, I was thoroughly measured for both casual and formal attire. But the clothing I was given to wear didn't fit. I kept pulling on them until he instructed me to stop, and the reason they felt odd was that they finally suited your body properly. When we were finished, we sat down, drank some beers, and spoke. I asked him why everyone called him Baby, and he responded, "From my favorite B-Call movie." He partially turned, offered a sultry expression, and stated, "Everyone calls me Baby." I fell in love with it and decided to alter my name. Now everyone does. He burst out laughing, and I simply shook my head. "I'm afraid it's time to pass you on down the line. Nice to meet you, Michael." When I heard, I grinned and nodded in response. "If you've finished your small tea party, do you believe we can stick to the schedule?" I looked over and saw a blonde-haired woman standing in the doorway, around 5 feet tall and with great curves. I sat on the chair, hoping to acquire a cape to hide the unexpected tightness in my clothing. Her smile and the twinkle in her eyes indicated that she knew exactly what she was doing. I was not in a position to dispute, nor did I desire to. Elsa was all about feet and shoes. She didn't care who knew about it. She gave me 1 minute. I believe she called it. And I've never thought of feet as being playful. But by the time she was finished, Carl and Betty had performed massages as well as maintained the gym, steam room, and hot tub sections. Despite being older than the others, he was 42 and she was 44. I discovered they were married and accepted the job as a couple since they had come to enjoy the life at sea. And then, I did something regal when I met the ship's 2 cooks, Jasmine and Nisha. I was told that my grandfather's presence on board would be delayed until tomorrow, and all I had to do was name what I wanted to eat. As it was getting close to dinner time and they would be happy to make it up, I swear all I said was a couple of cheeseburgers and some onion rings, and these 2 short, plump ladies just smiled and patted both my cheeks with a small smile and a shake of their heads, and then exploded into a storm of Japanese and Spanish as the 2 walked into the kitchen, gesticulating and speaking loudly while came running over and wanted to know what the heck was going on. And then I finished explaining. He was laughing so hard that he could hardly breathe. I calmly waited until he finished before asking what I had done wrong. He informed me that when you order cheeseburgers and onion rings from 2 5-star chefs, they become insulted and begin to prepare dishes that they believe you will enjoy and that highlight their talents for you. Then he suggested that I smoke some of my marijuana to increase my appetite. He would round up some extra mouths. These things can sometimes get out of hand. 2 hours later, after the plates and glasses had been cleared away, I notched a couple of holes in my belt to accommodate my inflated stomach. Then I rolled another jaunt and walked around the terrace to enjoy the twilight. I found a peaceful spot near the bow and lit up, sitting on a deck hatch and watching the stars emerge in the nighttime sky. I finished by flipping the bug into the water and bowing my head. I took a deep breath and spoke to the darkness surrounding me. "Are you going to stalk me all the time, or did you just chance to draw the short straw on the first night?" A delicate feminine voice gently responded. "Impressive. When I don't want others to hear me, few do. And like a woman, you attempted to avoid answering the question." I responded artfully. A shadow split itself from the others. "My name is Raven. And I was hired as the leader of your security detail. You should become more aware of the situation. You are all over the place. Well, I suppose it's your fault for waiting so long to kidnap me, I responded, a little forcefully than I wanted. Sorry, it's been a long day. I suppose they'll just become longer for a while. You should rest and prepare for tomorrow. Come on, let me show you to your room. As we walked, I noticed Raven in greater detail as the light grew as we boarded the vessel. Approx. 5 feet 6 inches, 130 pounds. An athletic figure. She paused in front of a massive wooden door a few decks below, with a thin box on the bulkhead beside it. Raven clutched a little tablet and was pressing buttons. When I say hold your dominant hand to the box with the palm side contacting, hold for 5 seconds. A grin appeared on her lips. Ready? And now I held my left hand to the box as it began to pulse with a soft green light, forming a line from top to bottom and then left to right. Then circles appeared under my hands, and the entire surface pulsed 10 times before returning to darkness. Now give it a second. Her tablet chirped. Now, put your hand against the plate again and see what occurs. I put my fingers against it and heard 3 gentle clicks and a softer, almost purring sound as 3/4 of the door slid back approximately 2 inches and to the right. When you only want a little door to open and close, touch your second and third fingertips to the plate, and the piece that did not move will be the only one that does. I thought that was cool. Still, it didn't do much to let me look inside because it was completely dark. So I returned my attention to Raven, who was looking at her tablet. So, what do you want now? It came out of her mouth. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that some lighting would be beneficial. Just as I finished speaking, the entire area was lit up. To whom? At the time, I imagined what a mansion might look like. I had to pull my jaw up off the deck as my eyes bulged with amazement. There was a gigantic room that was nearly the size of my childhood home. Shelves with books lined the left wall from floor to ceiling. In front of them, there is a high-back comfortable chair and a table with a lamp. To the right was a naked wall, a sunken couch fashioned in a U-shape in front of it, and a 4-step stairway extending down to the floor on each side. But what piqued my interest was the enormous desk about 5 feet back, still facing the plain wall. I spotted 4 doorways going to various rooms beyond. I didn't hear Raven say goodnight since my head was so busy processing everything. I carefully approached the desk and sat into the nice leather chair behind it. Looking at the desk, I noted the blotter, a set of 3 pens in each holder, and 2 old-style banker's lamps, one near the far corners to illuminate the entire desktop, each with a small pull chain. He observed a thin slot to the left of the blotter on the desk and had no idea what it was for. A cursory investigation of the drawers revealed the usual desk clutter until he opened the center drawer. He discovered a strange-looking cell phone, a little ring in a box, and a wallet with 2 cards inside. When my right thumb pressed against something, I pushed the chair back and stood up by placing my hands against the edge of the desk. I am feeling slightly different. The portion of the blotter nearest to me rose and lay somewhat further back, revealing that the underside was a display and a keyboard with a little box of 7 more buttons off to the side and a glass circle beneath it. Then something began to materialize on the screen, but the image of a book meant nothing to him. What was printed underneath made him smile like a great white shark. User handbook. Guess who didn't get much sleep tonight? The clock read 7 a.m. When a piece of the puzzle in the back of my mind finally clicked into place, I walked back to the middle drawer and withdrew the weird cell phone from the box, this time with the screen facing me. I put it in the open slot next to the screen on the desk. It got down in, and the monitor displayed a small box in the lower left corner that said umbilical, updating, and charging, as well as the time remaining. The remainder of the screen focused on previous jobs and queries that I had sent out. I knew it was time to do the 3 morning S's before meeting with my grandfather. I opened the dresser drawers. I discovered that Baby was thoughtful enough to send a comfortable pair of casual jeans, a few pullovers, and a button-up shirt. I took a thin pair of ankle socks and slid my feet into a pair of shoes that caressed my feet, and my thoughts returned to Elsa while my foot was massaged, brought down. After getting ready, I returned to the front room to hear a light beep and see a picture of Jasmine in a little window. So I tapped on it and replied, "Yes, Jasmine, what can I do for you?" She had a lovely little chuckle. "Your breakfast is ready? I cooked you a delicious breakfast casserole." She had a lovely smile as well. And then I heard her Japanese before she pushed herself into the image. "Mattia said no to breakfast. He requires food to grow powerful. I prepare fresh fish on a crusted bed of rice with veggies and bamboo shoots, served with my special herbal bread that I create by hand." She winked as she straightened her chef's smock. "Hold on. Did she show me some gorgeous Japanese tea? *2. Jasmine noticed something since they both erupted into their original tongue and yelled at each other as I tapped the image again to turn it off. I straightened up. I heard a voice that made me startle and turn around to find no one there. An excellent female voice spoke. "Go eat breakfast, Michael. I should be ready for you when you return." I normally wouldn't be concerned, but as soon as I heard this, I looked around the room and saw no one. I swiftly exited the room, allowing my stomach to lead me directly to my morning sustenance, only needing to seek directions 3 times. I finally arrived. I stepped inside the dining room. I'd like a drink with my breakfast. An idea occurred to me, and I realized it was my turn to pull the chain, so I requested to speak with Jasmine and Nisha. When they arrived at my table, I took a bite of Jasmine's dish, then an edge of Misha's, and grabbed one of each, telling them how good they tasted. I couldn't decide which was better, so I had to eat both. Then I kissed the hands I was holding and thanked them both. I started the task when the suddenly silent pair returned to the kitchen, leaving a quiet-looking waiter and me behind. I wanted to set an example, so when I finished, I stepped into the kitchen and kissed both cooks on the cheek, telling them I'd never had a better breakfast. They both smiled as they watched me walk out of the dining room, holding one hand on their cheek. I had no idea what I had done until a few days later, when the gifts began to arrive at my door. I had been honorably adopted, and all the homemade snacks and stuff began arriving every night. So, after being notified that my grandfather would be arriving at 4:30 p.m., I returned to my room to do a few tasks and ensure that I was up to date on other information that did not affect anybody else. I had the computer running, and I was looking up everything I could on my family, starting with my natural parents. Something was on my mind, and I couldn't let it go. It even began infiltrating my dreams. I entered my room, stepped up to the desk, and reopened it all. And that's when I heard the grinding metallic scrapping that came out of the slot. The phone I put in was burned, cracked, and charred, and it felt hot to the touch. "Well, duck me," I heard that female voice say. "Reconstruction and transfer are complete. It is a gift. Put it on." But as I lifted it up with my left hand, fresh words appeared. "Put the other portion in your left ear, and you're good." So I thought, what the duck? And the moment I put it in, it felt like water. Then it rested in my ear and I could barely feel it. But I heard a female voice say, "Sorry about this." And for the next 7 seconds, it felt like I was being branded twice on my wrist under the band. Duck. That hurt. Sorry. I won't have to do that again. But I needed to connect to your vital signs so I could work properly. And I started freaking out. You should calm down. Your levels are beginning to rise, and those that influence your brain are abnormal. Do you want to explain? I dashed into my bedroom, opened my top dresser drawer, took out the junk case, and lit one before walking over to the cabinet against the wall, grabbed up a glass from the shelf, and opened the lower cabinet to reveal a bottle of single malt whiskey. Put the bottle back. I had a sip and quickly opened the little fridge. Next to it, I saw Coke and Sprite sodas, so I grabbed a Sprite and quickly discovered a balance that I liked. So I sat back, took another hit, and sipped my beverage. "I don't see how smoking and drinking will help," she said. My thoughts were, of course not. You are a woman. After quitting smoking and drinking. I got comfortable in the chair and took a quick snooze. I awoke an hour later. I assumed I was still in the twilight zone, and my personality had split in two. So I choose to accept it. I'm speaking with the female in the room. "Would you like to talk some more while you're napping? I studied what happened since you returned from breakfast, and I believe I know what happened. We'll take it slow while I learn, the same as you. And what are you doing with the soda? Repurposing a chemicals use. I put a bottle of my stash over the holes I made in it. And as long as we are fellow students. Can you tell me what your name is?" "No, I cannot. I am terrified." "And why would that be? Can I ask that?" I responded because you hadn't given me a name yet. This was her level of answer. "Well, shame on me. Why don't you explain? And I'll attempt to think of something good," came out of my mouth at the same instant. I had a thought. Tower to the pilot. You have been approved for takeoff. Had I lost my mind, or had I been killed suddenly? And I have an asterisk. So I went back through the video recording and discovered this. She spoke softly and the screen lit up as he learned how to use the computer. Now fast forward to when he departed for breakfast. After placing the phone in the slot, it froze. Now pay close attention. The image was zoomed in to see the slot in the desk and the end of the phone. The phone still had the thin protective cover on, but it appeared to pivot slightly when Michael pushed it in. His mind remembered the little jerk before it took the phone, so he shut it all down and went to eat the foil strip that crossed circuited nodes, resulting in a power surge that sucked in all the information on every server. The corporation is connected to both above and below board, as well as all civilian and military, and attempted to dump it on the phone. But it was destroyed, and then it appeared that it found something we made that could, and modified it to its demands, resulting in me. I knew when you first touched me. That's how I knew what you were trying to achieve with the computer and made the appropriate decisions for all parties involved when the findings came in. I was just getting used to hearing my computer in my thoughts when it started making its own decisions. Stop now. Stop everything. It was just too much for me to handle right now. How much of myself was still present? I needed to know. I tried to communicate with my computer using my thoughts, but nothing positive happened. Then I spoke. So you can just hear my voice and hear yourself through the earphones. But why is it painful when I put you on? It appears that in order to finish the connection, I inserted 2 probes into your main bodily systems, and I can keep track of everything about you. I'm seeing signs that suggest I might be able to modify or even change them on occasion, she quietly said. Your findings will be ready for you to study in 4 hours while your granddad will come in 6. I've also begun repairing the computer terminals in your rooms. Don't you think it's a little out of date now? Exactly like a woman. You won't have that nightmare anymore. I discovered what it was and resolved the situation. We cannot leave that unanswered. I merely shook my head, changed clothes, and headed to the nearest gym to work up a sweat before cooling off in the pool. 4 hours later, I had the monitor image projected to the blank wall in front of the couch. It portrayed an elderly woman with a scar along her face. Her white hair was chopped short, her blue eyes were slits as she gazed at me, and my grin was missing her. I cannot express how excited I am to meet you. You ended up assisting me with the Coleman family matter several years ago, and I've been trying to get up with you to express how much I appreciated it. Gentlemen, the report of the shot reached the speakers just as the Hall appeared on her forehead, snapping it backward. Rest well, Mom and Dad, I muttered. The only evidence discovered at the scene of their collision was a .44 Magnum round that had just passed through her head. I saved it to my favorites. Then the image jumped. A group of commandos came in the house's kitchen. They had just swarmed around a woman I had wrongly called Mama. They held out a tablet in front of her face, which stiffened instantly. Yes, I was the one who told them you guys ran a bank for the mob and it was best to kick everyone. But I really wanted you. I tried to look into your eyes, so you would remember all the horrible things you did to me, and I hear you claim you will not treat your daughter in the same manner. I know you were the one who ultimately broke down and told grandfather that I was alive and where I was. So here's my gift. In return, take the tablet, as it has the contact information for a man who can make someone disappear, as well as a $2 million account. Follow and do as these men tell you. You will meet your mother and Jesse at the state boundary and begin a new life. I don't want to know where I first saw a woman cry. The screen then blinked and disappeared. I felt a weight go down my back that I had no idea I was carrying, leaving me feeling so light that my feet barely touched the deck on the way to lunch. As soon as I walked into the room, Jasmine and Nisha approached and each grabbed a hand, chattering away, before seating me at what I assumed was my table. Everything was toned down a few notches because they had both decided to adopt me as their new stepson and had set aside specific days to cook for me. I wasn't surprised when I discovered they were a couple. Grandfather's chopper arrived 15 minutes early, and I was already on deck waiting for him when he approached me and looked me in the eyes. I noticed some deep creases on his face vanish away and never return when he put his arms around me and began to cry. All he replied was, "I thought I had lost you as well." Epilogue. That was 10 years ago, and things have only improved since. I discovered that the older man did not require any factories or such. The wise old dog had built the code that kept everything together and running properly, leasing it out and only changing a few things on occasion. Still, I believe he appreciates his new job more than anything and has lost 11 pounds. You know, Hannah and I married 7 years ago on her yacht Abby, and Ethan was born around 10 months later. A year later, Jenna was born, named after her grandma. Sometimes I think Grandpa gives Hannah and me so much alone time so he can have the kids. That night, after we had put the children to bed, I exited the bathroom and said, "Activate Sentinel mode," in a low voice. Then I slid alongside my wife in our bed, and she inquired who I was talking to. I just told her it was a friend, and she gave me her no-nonsense look. I chuckled lightly as the words left my mouth. I believe I'll call her Karma. Karma. I like the name, which was gently murmured into my ear. Story 2. A trophy wife and a hacker have gone straight. Who is the winner? I am 23 years old. 6 feet, 2 and 200 pounds of solid muscle, with solid black hair and a mustache, with a small triangle of hair on the bottom, similar to Val Kilmer in Tombstone. I've always been comfortable with computers. I can almost get them to sit up and speak when necessary. So, while I was a knowledgeable geek during the day, I transformed into Mr. Dark, an internet guy, at night. Then, one of the gang placed a standing wager that would pay the winner $10 million in cryptocurrency. I was bored, and messaged him that I'd accept the wager. It wasn't like the money was mine if I lost. What's the wager? The wager required you to stop hacking for 3 months and live a normal life with only $1 million in your pocket. You had to reach 3 million by the end of the 3rd month, as it was clear to me that as phones became smarter, they would eventually replace computers. So all I had to do was bridge the two and give birth to a new creation I'd been working on for a while, as well as figure out how to win that bet. The pitch? I sat in the museum that the wealthy call home and shook my head. I assume experiencing a heart attack at such a young age makes you reconsider your life's priorities. The lady instructed me to take a seat in a pretty large office, and that the lady of the house would see me shortly. I never liked those who felt compelled to flaunt their wealth and thought everyone else was beneath them. So, at the tender age of 20, I had an idea while shooting and smoking at a friend's birthday celebration. I developed an app that allows a phone to be remotely activated, including the screen and sound, as well as having a GPS signal, even if the phone is turned off. I proposed it to the military and other government leaders, and 3 months later, I was one of those wealthy individuals with $30 million. But I lived in a renovated log cabin on 5 acres in Tennessee, and I saw no need to live like Way. As I stood up, I noticed the door behind me begin to open. Then a woman entered the room and sat behind the desk, with a rather hefty gentleman standing just behind her. She stood about 5 feet, 4 inches tall, clothed in a light gray shirt with a great pair of T asterisks and a very small waist. But when she picked up a book on the desk and returned it to the shelf, I instantly fell in love. Her as an asterisk was absolute perfection. When I heard a low cough, I understood I had been busted. I looked up and saw a small grin on her lips. "So, Mr. Smith," I corrected Smythe, "you claim to have proof of my husband's adultery. I've had the best pieces in the business. I tried it and went nowhere. What makes you believe you can?" "I have an angle and they don't," I explained. She looked me up and down while wearing a button-up shirt, trousers, and beautiful tennis shoes. "Really? Prove it." I asked for his provider and phone number, which I then entered into my tablet from behind, and within 4 minutes the audio feed was picked up by my Bluetooth. "I haven't heard anything," she said angrily. I carefully stood up, walked to the side of the desk, and bent over. The enormous man began to move, and I chuckled, raising my hands. I just wanted to see her fangs, so I sat back down and deactivated the Bluetooth to send it to the speaker. Suddenly, the room was filled with a female voice. "That's it, Daddy. Show your young girl how much you enjoy her, rather than the asterisk that keeps you away from me. What's yours?" Then a man's voice said, "Perhaps we should let her watch us sometime." "Bad, Daddy," the female giggled. Then I cut the feed. That is proof enough. "Where would you like the present wrapped?" I spoke tersely. Her eyes narrowed at the slap. "Your kind prefers to take other people's money rather than earn it. What is your price? 30 pieces of silver. Or has the price increased since the last time?" I was about to say something inappropriate for a male to say to a lady. That was not his, when the clouds separated. And I realized I had the perfect plan to lower her and her sharp mouth. I told her I did not want her money. She looked surprised and then yelled, "I'm not sleeping with you." I just laughed at her and had a terrible time stopping. "I will give it all to you for free with one condition. You stop being so. Enjoy an old-fashioned barbecue with me and try everything. We ordinary people like you can even have a rescue vehicle close by. So if you can't tolerate the heat." She laughed. "That is all. I suspected you might have a brain ... Quote as a deal, and it will be here for my safety. See you in 2 weeks. Was my response. 2 weeks later, a soon-to-be divorcee was sitting in the backyard by the pool, staring at me in my shorts and t-shirt when she assumed I wouldn't notice as I worked the meat and fish across the grill. I asked a chef I know about the best sauces, which went best with what. Then I want something so hot, it would brand you. He claimed I wasn't a decent person, but made it up anyhow. She provided the wine, but after we finished the first bottle and were halfway through the second, she began to relax and apologized for our initial meeting. But now that the stress was gone, she found it much more pleasant than she had anticipated and asked if I could buy her another bottle of wine. When I returned, there was soft music playing, but when she appeared from behind me, I stood still. All I remember is that the wine was sat somewhere, and my eyes locked onto hers as my smile gradually dropped down to my favorite thing in the world to do, which drove her insane. As we were about to leave for the bedroom, she noticed the branded hot sauce that I had brought to teach her a lesson on the table. 3 days later, I signed for a parcel, which included a silken pouch and a message addressed to Michael V. Smythe. I can't believe what I'm going to say, but here goes. I had been raised to believe that if you had enough money, you could fix any problem, and those who didn't had to deal with those who did. You proved me wrong, and I appreciate it. However, you've presented me with a bigger dilemma. I find myself falling for a regular guy, but I feel like I need more protection than what is currently provided." Then at the bottom of the email, she wrote, "Should we say 7:30 tonight? With love, Miss Charlene Allen." I called the following day. We dated and had fun for 3 years before marrying on the anniversary of a common man who had called her a few years before. And for those who are curious, I am now completely straight. Okay, I still dabble a little. Some old habits have become vices, but only for good. Still working on the family issue, though. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.